Okay, good evening everybody. So I'm Chris Yantos, I'm the project manager for Site 12. Again, another radiologically focused project, and Christine, I will do my best to talk slowly. I know in the past I have not. So feeding off of Keith's introductions, I want to introduce another person who's a very important part of our radiological team, Zach Edwards, another huge part of my project and all these other projects that we're talking about today, but he's from the Radiological Affairs Support Office in Virginia. So when we have questions at the end of the presentations, hopefully Zach can lend a hand. So this is Zach. Anyways, Site 12 fieldwork update. Continuation of June's presentation that I gave. So this is an update of things that have happened in the last 2 months. Next slide. Okay, so the two main areas that we have been working on since June is Northpoint and Bayside. These are the solid waste disposal areas that we've discussed earlier. Along with this presentation, we'll go into the dust monitoring and the air monitoring. That was a focus of the last meeting. Activity schedule for activities coming up, and then of course contact information. Second part of this presentation is a follow-on to surveys that we did last summer. So we went into every single residence within Site 12. We did a radiological scan. The result of that survey was identifying 3 areas of elevated activity. And so this summer we executed another contract to go back in and actually excavate out and investigate those areas. So I'll give you a follow-up to to that project. Northpoint, solid waste disposal area, Northpoint. So we began excavations in May. We did remove 2 buildings and the foundations, concrete foundations of those 2 buildings. Beneath those 2 buildings, we needed to excavate down to 4 feet. 4 feet is the target depth based on the 2007 excavation extent. So if you recall, this is a continuation of the non-time critical removal action from 2007. And so we're repeating what was done back in that day, plus more. So this is the first step, is to go ahead and remove the material that was placed there in 2007. So that's why we went to 4 feet in that area. What have we found beneath 1231 and 1233? Well, we've recovered 9 low-level rad objects, and actually I just found out today that that number jumped to 11. So we're up to 11 low-level rad objects attributed to Northpoint's solid waste disposal area, Northpoint. Removed upwards almost 6,000 cubic yards of material. And as I said, the follow-on to the 2007 activity, now that we're at this stage here in this picture, we have to then visually identify the debris, remove the existing debris in the sidewalls and the bottom of this excavation, and then take chemical and radiological samples. So that's our next step that we'll be hopefully completing by late August 2015. Okay, a figure showing progress thus far. So in the hashed areas, this is where we have removed the clean backfill material and the buffer material. I think I've explained this a couple of times. I'll go through it real quickly, but the previous excavation extent is shown here in the geometric shape. The sidewalls we consider to be contaminated. Of course, that's what we're testing to make sure it's chemically and radiologically free. So the material that we placed here in 2007 is of course in contact with that sidewall. We're calling that buffer material. So in the areas that is shown here on this figure that's hashed, this is where we've removed the clean backfill and the buffer material. So that's, as you can see, on the north side of this excavation, we are done. In this area we are more or less done, and we still have to come across the street to 1222. And I'm actually just realizing something here. And I think we had a late change of the figure. This is actually solid waste disposal area at Bayside, not Northpoint. Right. So I apologize for that error. This is a confusion. So let me put this in the frame of reference of Bayside, so you can scratch this for a second. I'll come to the Northpoint figure in a second, but this gives you all the things that I've stated thus far are still true, but this is Bayside, not Northpoint. Can we continue to the next? Okay, so this is actually an actual figure of Northpoint. What this figure shows us is not the excavation progress. This is actually where have we found those 9 or now 11 LLROs, so low-level rad objects. Where have we found them? This figure shows you that. So we demolished these 2 buildings previously, 1231 and 1233. And when we took the material out from beneath those down to 4 feet, we took that material and threw it up on an RSY pad, which is a radiological screening pad. And when we start scanning that pad, sometimes we get elevated activities. We cross-check that pad back to the location, and this gives us where those objects were found. So if anybody's curious where the 11 objects were found, this gives you that example. We did find some in the sidewall here as well. So this just gives you a kind of a geographic layout of those exceedances. Next slide. Northpoint. So what do low-level rad objects look like? Here are 3 examples. They are just small pieces of metal in some cases, sometimes unidentifiable. In this case, in terms of what they may have previously been, they're degraded or eroded or rusted. But they do give off elevated activity when we run the scanning equipment across them. So we're easily able to pluck those out and find those. They stand out against the background that we normally see. So here are some examples. Very small sized. You can see this gives you some sort of scale, but both of those pictures as well. So next slide. Okay, Bayside. Bayside, we have started excavations in June. We have removed 3 of the 4 buildings that we demolished in Bayside. Again, as I mentioned before, we remove the foundations and then we excavate down to the 4-foot level. Of those 3 buildings that we've removed, we've encountered 55 LLROs. Okay, so now let me clarify this. This is 55 low-level rad objects across the 2 solid waste disposal areas, not just this project site. So if you back out 11 LLROs, you're left with 44. Plus there were 3 that were removed from the housing surveys from last summer. So the count for Bayside is actually 41, if I'm doing the math correctly. As of August 14th, we removed over almost 6,500 cubic yards of material, and of course we're still working on this area with one more building foundation to remove, which is where this gentleman here is standing. We'll remove that foundation, continue down our excavation, and then do our sidewall sampling. This is the figure that I showed you. It was out of order previously, but this is the same figure. I think I've already explained this slide. And again, as I showed you for Northpoint, this is the Bayside. Where did all 41 objects come from? This is your geographic layout. So most of them come in clusters underneath the solid waste disposal area. So if you remember, the brown is where we previously excavated and backfilled. So we wouldn't expect to find anything in that brown area. So where we do find these items are typically beneath the foundations. Okay, dust monitoring. I'm going to try and go into this in a little more detail. I think in June we didn't cover it quite as clearly as I could have. So dust monitoring, air monitoring is really done in 2 stages. First step, we call this the first line of defense, is the dust monitoring. So the concept here being if you don't have dust, you're not going to have exposure to chemicals. So this is really the focus of the project, is to protect workers and potentially anybody on the other side of the fence, being the public or residents, from dust. How do you get real-time monitoring for dust? It's with these instruments right here. And this is a PDR, or a personal data logging real-time aerosol monitor. So this is going to pick up very fine particles that are in the air, sometimes even fog and mist. So it's going to pick up everything. It's going to tell us if there is anything in the air. That gives us a real-time alarm, so we can stop work at that moment if there is any exceedance. So the 2 steps in dust monitoring is to, of course, have a health and safety person observing the work, making sure that the excavators aren't creating dust, making sure that we're using water appropriately, cleaning trucks, tarping trucks, all that good stuff. So it's the visual observation along with this personal data monitor, which are sometimes also worn by the excavators inside the excavation, and workers on the ground at ground zero, so workers that are in the excavation itself. We have 2 to 3 per location, so I'll get into the 6 locations later, but depending on whether we're excavating or screening soil, we will have 3 or 4 of these air monitors, dust monitors, placed on the fence lines, both upwind and downwind, and moving according to the wind direction. So we have a wind sock on the job site. Somebody observes a windsock. If it moves or swings, we then move this dust monitor. So that's the first line of defense, as we call it. Next slide. And so this is a layout of the 6 areas I mentioned before. We have 3 excavation sites. Of course, only 2 are active right now, Bayside and Northpoint. Westside will be coming up in a few weeks. We're screening soil at Site 32, Bigelow Court, and this is clean backfill. So at all 6 locations, we actually have 3 to 4 air monitors going in, or dust monitors, correct myself, going at any given time. And then the second layer of monitoring, if you will, is the actual air monitoring, where we collect samples and send those samples to a lab. These samples are analyzed for lead, PAHs, PCBs, and rad. So this is where we get our analysis. So once you break the first line of defense, or if, hypothetically, you were to break that first line of defense and there were to be dust in the air, well then these monitors would then pick that up. We would run that filter in a laboratory, and that would tell us, give us a example of somebody who may be outside of our fence line breathing this air or this dust. And that gives us laboratory data. We've just started this program. Of course, there's a lag time between when we actually collect the samples and when we get data, but to date, we have not had any exceedances for any of these chemicals of concern. And again, where do we place these air monitors? There are upwind and downwind. So our main upwind location is west of Westside Drive. That's going to tell us what's coming onto the island. Of course, the predominant wind at Treasure Island is coming from the west, blowing to the east. So this is going to tell us what may be coming across from the city, across the bay, and onto our site. So it gives you a baseline. And then we have 2 air monitors that are located downwind of the excavation site. So that's going to be your area of highest probability of having airborne dust with chemicals in them. That is where we're placing our air monitors, again, to represent somebody from the public who may be outside of our fence line. Okay, activity schedule. This is broken out into solid waste disposal areas, along with our processing sites down there at Site 32 in Bigelow Court. And this just gives you a 3-week or 3-month look ahead to find out what activities might be going on in your area if you were to live near one of these solid waste disposal areas. Something important to note here for those of you that live near Bayside Drive or periodically drive through Bayside Drive, it will be closed coming up on Thursday, access was restricted as of Monday because we're building a temporary parking lot for the residents of 1224 only. Anyways, so something to put on the radar. Bayside Drive will be closed. And this gives you an idea that we will be processing soil all the way out through November into the new year, and backfill will be outward from there. Okay, scheduled milestones. As I mentioned, excavations hopefully will be complete by October. We'll continue to process soil on the RSY pads and dispose of soil this year. Now we had to do radiological free release of the sidewalls and the bottoms of these excavations. That does take a little bit of time to do. That'll push us out into March of 2016. Hopefully with site restoration and a final status survey report that we can turn into the regulators by June of 2016. Followed by a final remedial action completion report, which will wrap up the non-time critical removal action in August or September of 2016. So that's just the reporting phase. Okay, so that's it for the active, or the work that's going on right now. So again, a follow-up from last summer. This is a picture of what we did 1 year ago. We went into all the residences, took instrument readings. We did come up with 3 locations. Those 3 locations are mentioned right here. They were elevated areas that didn't require an emergency removal action. These are items that we promised to come back and get later or investigate. That's what we did in early June, or early July, sorry. So we located those areas again, as we did last year, cut the concrete, removed the items that were beneath the concrete, excavated the soil surrounding that object, tested the soil, and we are getting ready to close out those excavations. So this activity is now done. We have removed all the objects located from last year's housing surveys.